and welcome to another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer. We are a queer podcast that creates space to talk about all things queer. Today, you were just joined by me, Katie. Archie will be back next week, but we have a special guest for you today, joining us all the way from LA, and they will introduce themselves once we get into it. But we will be back next week with regularly scheduled Katie and Archie times, so please enjoy.
Questions of how you identify, seeking answers to clarify. Whether you're queen
or somewhere in between, let's be perfectly queer.
So I would just love to say welcome, Moe, to our podcast. It's been a long time coming and we are so excited to have you here. If you wouldn't mind, would you be able to introduce yourself and what you do?
Yes. Hey, I am Moe Ari Brown, licensed marriage and family therapist. I am the love and connection expert at Hinge. So for the past decade, I have been working with individuals, families, and couples in therapy. And I also identify as non-binary transgender. And so I went on my own journey of authenticity, so to speak. And in that process, I began developing a niche working with the transgender community, helping my brethren get support for gender affirming care. So I moved on to educating other clinicians on how to provide referral letters for top surgery and other kinds of surgeries. And now my role at Hinge as the love and connection expert really is a blend of that expertise in working with LGBTQ plus people, my love for love, and Hinge's overall mission of being the most inclusive dating app on the market. So I'm very honored to represent a very beautiful and thriving community in the app and then off of the app.
You seem to be the perfect person for it. I've seen your TEDx talk in Atlanta, and you're just such an authentic individual who has such a very warming vibe. I've got to say, for a love expert, you seem to be the perfect person sitting in that space. And I'm really excited to talk to you as well, because funnily enough, Archie and I actually met on Hinge and all those years ago.
Wow.
And yeah, exactly. And then I was just like, oh, this is like a full circle, talking to somebody who's a professional in the situation and somebody from Hinge as well. So thank you. This is great. It seems like such a great journey that you've gone on, and it sits very much within what you love and what you know. It's fabulous.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's very, very kind. And it has been a really beautiful merger and a very beautiful journey to getting here and then having the opportunity to share the things that I've learned. I just love being able to do this. So I'm very grateful that shows up in my work.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things I want to talk to you about today, because it seems that Hinge has really come out and understanding in the world of dating, especially in the online platforms, that we have issues with making connections and how we portray ourselves in life. And I just wanted to run into a couple of those topics because I find it's a global issue that we've all had. We've moved on to more of an online presence more than any other time in the world.
Yeah.
And that I think being able to portray yourself in that authentic light and really get yourself across is so important. I was looking through the Hinge questions and a little bit of what's coming out at the moment, and it was talking about embracing cringe mode. And I love that.
Yeah.
I really love that as a topic. So I was just wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about, why is cringe mode a thing? Like, why do people feel the need to, I don't know, not be the most authentic self, I guess?
Yeah. So, cringe is this feeling that happens when we feel embarrassed, we're doing something new for the first time, we're uncomfortable, it makes us feel vulnerable, naked, so to speak, and it's completely normal. I just want to normalize it. It comes up. And often with my clients, I encourage them to sit with that feeling for a while and understand where it's coming from. A lot of times when we are experiencing cringe, it's not only happening when it's not even usually happening just when something is difficult or challenging or something we don't want is happening. Oftentimes we're feeling cringe when we're excited, when we're about to go on a date with someone for the first time, when we match with someone and we're like sending that initial message and we don't know if they're going to like what we said. That is cringe. So when we talk about embracing it, we're talking about accepting that it's going to happen. And you don't need to be rid of cringe in order to be successful. You really need something else. I say shift your focus from cringe, focus on courage. Courage is really going to help us to be vulnerable, to lean in, to say, I like you, to send that comment and that like, to send that rose, to let people know that you really are interested in them. That's what we need. Courage. And you can just accept that the cringe is going to be there and do it anyway.
That's such a fair point, isn't it? I think that you're so fair in that point. It's that we need the courage. And I don't know why in this world we find that so difficult, like the difficulty of being vulnerable. Maybe it's I don't know, the fear of rejection, or it's because it is that like that balled up feeling, whether it's excitement or whether it's something else in the world, and we see it in other people and it just gives you that like, very visceral reaction. Yeah. And why are we so scared of rejection, I guess? What do you think?
That is a really great question. When we really want something, it is really challenging to sit with the possibility that we might not have it. And I think that that's where this worry around rejection comes. When we really want something, nobody wants to be disappointed. And we're actually, as humans, wired to understand pain. That's like how we used to survive in the wild, so to speak. Like in order to not be eaten, we had to understand a bit of pain so that we wouldn't do the things that would get us harmed. It's like survival. But I encourage everyone to shift from survival instincts and survival mode to thriving mode. We don't really need to be existing like we're existing in the wild. Thriving is building lasting connections, the kinds of things that are more intentional with how we've evolved. We've got technology, we've got all kinds of things that have made our lives easier. So why are we still in survival mode? So why people are doing this worry around rejection, it makes a lot of sense. So we're kind of wired to remember painful things. Even if the painful things are not happening as often as the joyous things, that pain is just so memorable to us. And yeah, I just want to take a moment to normalize that. The question, I love it because it really is fair. Why are we doing this? We're wired to, but that's only in survival mode. I think the thriving really sends us into or sets us up to relate to one another in a different way.
That's such a fair point. And I hadn't really thought about it in that way because you're so right. We're wired to be anti-rejection because it's such a negative thing we perceive. Mm-hmm. But you're right, we do need to move into that other mode. And I guess that being in the world that it is today, how would you advise people to move into more of a thriving mode, or like how do we shift that mindset?
Yeah, no, I love that. As you were saying that, what I thought of is that we're also, while we're wired to remember this pain, and you put it be anti-rejection, which I love. We're also wired toward love. And so in that way, it's pretty natural to us to also be heart open. I think that that's our antidote to rejection. That's our antidote to loneliness, connection, and love. And so we don't have to really do more. We have to just be and allow for relationships to take place. A lot of times I've seen people getting in their own way. So what we're seeing in the Hinge Gen Z date report is that worry around rejection is preventing people from sending those messages or reaching out to someone that they like. And so what I encourage people to do at this moment is to allow for the possibility of love. Shift your expectation from the possibility of rejection. Shift your expectation to the possibility that you won't be rejected, that you will be embraced. If everybody is worried about rejection, but 90% of Gen Z Hinge daters said that they were looking for love, the majority of people want love. That means that the possibility for love is far greater than the possibility of rejection, but somehow we are not allowing for it to take its full place. And so just allowing for love is a big part of this. I could say more, but I want people to really understand that before I get into the other things.
Yeah. Do you think that it might also be that people are putting these expectations on what they think is going to happen rather than living in the moment and feeling, like you were saying, if everyone's wanting love, we're not sitting and within that and feeling that and just giving that, if you know what I mean? Like it's just, I feel like we may think too many things. We may overanalyze of what potentials are without just living within it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that we could be in a place of overanalyzing what is happening or overanalyzing the possibility of rejection or DBL, digital body language, like we talked about in the Gen Z Hinge date report. And what I'm proposing is that if we remove some of that worry, we will stop operating from that place. And if we shift our focus to courage, shift our focus to love, shift our focus to what we intentionally want to create, we're going to start moving in a different direction. So, like, absolutely, to your question.
You know, I'm so glad you brought up digital body language because that was going to be my next question. Because
Beautiful.
It's such a big thing that that we think about these days and how we represent ourselves, whether that be like on social media or within the dating profiles or at work. It's such a big thing to be aware of. And I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions of like, first of all, would you mind defining what digital body language is and why you think it's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for asking because I love talking about digital body language. So we're calling it DBL at Hinge for short. So it'll be DBL from here on out in this conversation, at least for me. And so DBL is all about the virtual cues that we're sending, the vibes we're sending out online. So when you're in person or IRL with someone, you have body language. That's the nonverbal cues that you're sending. Online, that's also happening. And for Gen Z, they are a digitally native generation. So they don't know a world without technology. They've actually had to become pretty savvy at understanding these kinds of social cues that are unspoken online. Well, DBL cues can range from emojis, response time, punctuation, and more. So there are a lot of ways to interpret whether or not someone's into you based on the cues they're sending out. And yeah, I'll pause that definition right there because I know we're going to get into more about that.
Absolutely. I find it so interesting because it really does change from person to person and how you project yourself. But then it also, like you noted, it depends on your experience within the digital platforms itself. Like Gen Z is so honed into it and understanding. But sometimes I guess when it comes to dating, you've got to understand what you portray yourself as well as what somebody else portrays themselves as might not actually be who they really are, and they might not understand how to portray themselves. Does that also come into it, I guess, a little bit? Like, how do we do it better?
Yeah, no, you're bringing up a really great point that self-awareness is really important when you're talking to someone on like an app like Hinge. You have to understand what vibes you're sending out. And so what we're finding is that, what we found in the Gen Z date report is that 77% of Gen Z Hinge daters said that DBL tells them a lot about their date's intentions. So they're learning a lot. This has led to more than half of Hinge daters saying that they overanalyze somebody's DBL at a point. And so there is a lot that's left up to interpretation. So I love that you set us up and said that this varies from person to person. How can we have better DBL? How shall I count the ways? So
give us your like top 5 to 10, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you the top 3 DBL signs that Gen Z Hinge daters are looking for are response timing, who initiates the conversation, and then message consistency. So those are ranking in the top 3 of the ones that people are reading into to tell them about someone's intentions. So if you're responding on time, that for Gen Z Hinge daters, that usually means within 24 hours. So I'm putting a time on it right now. That's enough time to figure out what you want to say. In terms of message consistency, that just means how you message remaining similar from moment to moment. So if you're usually sending paragraphs and you switch it up and you send just a K with a period, that's confusing to someone. And then initiating the conversation gets you bonus points, I'm quite certain, because initiating the conversation is a deliberate way of showing interest. And if we're all worried about rejection, the person who sends that communication definitely has a leg up on the competition.
Oh, I so agree with you there. There's nothing quite like having a full-blown conversation with somebody and then suddenly it goes down to like just K and you're like, what's happened? What have I done?
Yeah.
What's happened in this situation? Because you're so right. It means a lot. Like we do overanalyze those kind of things because we don't have, I guess, from my perspective is you don't have all the other body language cues as you would do. Even like us sitting here, there are more things that we see rather than when we send a message. And your interpretation of what it means is going to definitely come into and play that part a lot, isn't it?
Absolutely. Our interpretation, certainly.
I just thought it's such a funny thing because I feel like DBL definitely changes through age and through the generations. Like we were talking, like you've got your Gen Zs and your millennials and what our expectations are. But I was wondering if it changes with queer community. I personally don't think it generally would do, but it's I guess it's one of those things that we're all humans. It shouldn't really, should it?
Yeah, but you bring up a really interesting point about culture and how culture really changes how we communicate in general. So I imagine that there are so many ways that queer people across culture communicate that are specific to different aspects of culture. And so it might be whether or not it could be language use as your DBL signal. So like if in some communities, let's say I'll say for a lot of, I would say Black trans guys in the States, it's pretty common to call each other bro. If somebody didn't call you that, you might be like, wait, what's happening? Do they really want to be my friends? So that I could see that as a DBL signal. It could be about language choice for queer people. Again, I don't have any stats on that right now, but my idea would be that culture would bring out some type of language differences that would end up leading to DBL.
Is there any way that you would guide people so they can decipher their own DBL so they know how to portray themselves better online?
Yeah, totally. So it really starts with self-awareness. I'd say that that's the source of really understanding yourself and how you're communicating. Ask yourself, well, I'll walk it back a little bit. When I was in grad school for family therapy, one of my professors, love her so much. Her name is Dr. Alexandra Solomon. She's the author of the book Loving Bravely and Love Every Day and Taking Sexy Back. She's been doing really cool stuff. But she always says, she asked herself and she asks all of the couples that she works with to ask themselves, what is it like to be in relationship with me? That's where I start this conversation around deciphering your own DBL, understanding how you're coming across to people. Ask yourself, what is it like to be in relationship with me? How would someone receive my text, my message communication? How would somebody receive the punctuations I'm using? Now, I don't think that we should be tailoring what we say in an inauthentic way to people please. Deciphering your own DBL is about being intentional about the energy you're sending out. So once you've gotten beyond self-awareness, the second thing I'll say, and these are the two main parts, are thinking intentionally about how you want other people to feel. For me, I want people to feel loved once they've communicated with me. That's in everything I do, whether it's an email or any other kind of communication. And so if that's my intention, how might I need to show up in order for them to feel that way? Once you've sat with that, you usually get to a different standard in your way of being or a different standard with your DBL.
That's such good advice. And I guess that's just such good advice with dating as well, whether it be online or in person. I've got to say, it's having the self-reflection of what you want to put it out into the world and being authentic in that. And it's I think that if we were to all do that, we would probably, first of all, love ourselves more and feel more at one with what we want to be in the world. I guess my question is that we talk a lot about online dating these days, and there is so much in that space with Hinge and like having communication and having all those great relationships. Is how do we then transfer that into real life? And I guess that, like you just mentioned, if you're authentic, I guess it would transfer pretty easily because you've been that person that whole time. What's some tips that you have for people out there, our listeners, to transferring relationships from the online platforms into the in real life platforms?
Yeah. So I of course encourage anyone to get out there and go on some great dates. When you've messaged with someone and you pretty much know you like them, initiate the conversation about going out. This is what we call in the Gen Z date report, having the WAW, or what are we conversation. I believe it truly can happen at any stage of the relationship. And it could be like, what are we doing here? Are we going to go out? And so I say initiate that conversation, get out and get out there and go on some dates. Now, when you talk about communication translating from being on the app to being in person, I encourage people to know or to remember that sometimes people's digital communication varies drastically from their in-person communication. So someone might talk a lot online and then in person be a little bit more shy with their verbal communication. That just has to do with different people's processing styles, language styles. Some people, I like to think I'm 1,000 times more eloquent when I am writing. And I have had a lot of time to think about what I want to say and edit. You could be dating a copywriter. I heard that like on another show. I was talking to someone. They're dating a copywriter, so they were getting paragraphs, but in person it was different. And so it just really depends on the person's comfort level. I invite people to be curious about the difference when someone is showing up and ask them.
Yeah, that's so fair, isn't it? Because you never really know what you're going to get in the day. And I guess just going on the dates, I think that's such a fair point, is just like putting yourself out there and going on the date. Because no matter what you build up in your mind, it probably, I can guarantee, it's probably not going to be as bad as like the worst date you ever think about. Yeah. You might as well just get yourself out there and do what you can do. And no matter what, it's an experience, isn't it? Like if you're putting yourself first, at least then you can know what you want. And even if it doesn't work out, at least you got the experience, really, isn't it?
That's such a beautiful and positive perspective. Absolutely. I completely agree. And that's essentially what I want people to understand or believe when we have these worries around rejection. I want people to lean in, like you're saying, to the experience, to understanding themselves a bit better from the experience, to really connecting with a person, even if it's just for that one date. The possibility for what could happen or the connection you could create is endless. And so even if it doesn't work out, you get to learn something about yourself. You get to have had a good time, and you get to take that information to a new relationship.
Yeah, it's all the positive vibes and intentions, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. Being a love expert and all of your history with therapy as well, what would be your top tips for somebody who's in the dating field at the moment?
Yeah. Oh, my best advice. I always encourage people to get to know themselves, not in a cliche way, but get to know yourself and what you're bringing into the relationships that you are forming. Once you know your work, you understand what your relationships are going to bring you to work on. When we don't understand the impact of our primary relationships, like our families of origin and where we came from, then we're usually surprised by what we end up having to work on in relationships. Meaning, like if you came from a family where you didn't always feel included for one reason or another, you could potentially be meeting that in the relationships that you're in, and that ends up being work that you have to do individually, collectively. I encourage people to get to know their work so that they're not surprised. I say this because our romantic relationships are not the first time that we experience love, but quite often it's the first time we start talking about love in a very intentional way. And so as a therapist, I'm often working with couples 5, 6, 7 years into their relationship on childhood or on things that, that they're just realizing at that point are impacting them. So if you can equip yourself with that knowledge early on, you are setting an even greater foundation for the relationship. So I'll say that as the biggest thing. I won't layer it with too much more because that's a lot of work in itself.
It's so true, isn't it? And I guess by knowing what things that you need to work on yourself, then you can know when your triggers are, because a lot, like you were mentioning, it's not the first time that we've encountered love in our lives. That by having the awareness of if somebody acts in a certain way and we find it triggering, then we can, if we've done the work and we understand what our work is, we can see that and take a step back and I guess realize what our reactions are without making it about sometimes you'll have, and this is just, I guess, in relationships all in general, is sometimes you'll react to something and it might be classed as an overreaction, which is never a good way to put it, but it would be a bigger reaction than you'd expect. And I guess understanding what you're saying is understanding and putting the work in for yourself and understanding your work makes it easier to be able to work in other relationships, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. It makes it easier to understand what your stuff is and what the other person or other people's stuff are. And so, it's really important to have done the work around your own self-awareness, at least so that you know what you have to work on.
It's so true. I find it great you mentioning this as well, is because I think that even though there sometimes is a stigma with therapy, which I think is completely ridiculous personally, some people find it easier going into couples counseling or couples therapy sessions because it's that, we're doing it for our relationship. But having the understanding and knowledge that we should all just be doing this for ourselves because we've all had different journeys that we've gone on. That having a subset from that and being able to talk to somebody, a professional, about it may actually grow us as a human being and be better for us in the long term. It's just absolutely brilliant. The connections you must make with people is just absolutely amazing. Yeah,
we spend so much of our lives, many people, I won't say everyone, but many people, and definitely in the dominant cultures, we spend a lot of our lives working towards some long-term committed relationship goal, whatever that looks like for you. We spend a lot of our time working toward that. There's not another aspect of our lives that we work toward for so long without reading a manual, reading a book, trying to learn some tools. Like when it's our career, we've gone through years and years of education. When it's another long-term life goal, we spend so much time researching. Like when we're trying to buy a home, it's so many steps in understanding and saving and doing all of this stuff. When it comes to relationships, I want it to become second nature to think about a relationship as this really important life goal that we also have to put the work in to understanding the tools, spending the time to understand ourselves and really engaging with it like it's important. We often we haven't, as a culture or society, really given relationships the chance that they need to thrive. Like we've been using this language around thriving. I like it. We haven't really given it the chance to thrive because we have to really be intentional about how we're approaching relationships. I guess that's where having the space and being authentic, and I love the word authenticity. There's something about it that I know it's a pop word in everything at the moment, but it's just, it's such a brilliant factor in making the best life for ourselves as well as the connections that we've got. It's absolutely amazing. And I've got to say our time's kind of running out at the moment, Mo, but thank you so much for chatting. If people want to follow you further, where can they find you on social media or on the different platforms? Yes, please follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Love Out Proud. And listen to my podcast that I host with my wife. It's called Be Your Own Love Goals Podcast. We are a queer relationship podcast, and We talk about our decade-long partnership and all of the things we've learned from coming out multiple times and just really transcending a lot of challenges together. So I'd love for people to connect with me, talk to me. I talk back. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will listen on to you. It's such a brilliant space to learn more, and especially for the queer community. I think it's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Mo. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer. I know it's been a little bit of a different one, but it's been really enjoyable getting people in for interviews so we can talk about all the wealth of stuff out there about the queer community with the different experts that are around. So thank you today for Mo, and can't wait to tell you guys about all the fun interviews that we've got planned for further on in this year. It's been a lot of fun making this one for you, but we will be back to our scheduled Archie Katie episodes from later on next week. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end, and we appreciate you guys. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe, and find us on any of your social medias with Let's Be Perfectly Queer Pod. Thanks again for listening, guys. Bye-bye.
Let's be perfectly queer.